Testing audio, testing audio. Testing audio, testing audio. Testing audio, testing audio. Testing audio, testing audio.
That's basically the plus also if you're plus finances would be because I can't do anything about the finances because I'm a federal employee. But also of any school board.
And then have you got is the Zoom meeting open?
I think it is.
Be sure to keep your eye on the Zoom meeting.
I've got it labeled as Paul Rude. I've got my name in there as Paul Rude. So,
but keep your eye on the crowd.
yeah, I will. All joking aside.
The protagonists will not be there, but regardless.
All right. Testing audio. Audio.
Someone create a spam account with like a mutual of mine. Like I cannot like and it's definitely not you. Democrats meeting.
Democrats favorite type of Democrat,
Are you opposed? Okay, so it should be.
Yeah, but I feel like they. No. I don't think the background is supposed to be part of the group. But I feel like this is. But I feel like this is very late. But I feel like this was. I'm guessing this film was shot pretty recently. Like this is well past the prime. Well past the group, so this is very late group. So, like usually the later version of usually the more like early Gothic was very simple and like Gothic very late. So I'm thinking it was very like early.
meeting. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Find your seats if you can. Please find your seats if you can, and welcome to our July Arlington Democrats meeting. Not sure where we are in COVID policy now, but if you feel more comfortable with the mask, by all means, please wear one. And if you experience any symptoms, certainly please. So again, we've got a packed agenda tonight. July is the anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act, so we're going to get a really good presentation. So, the last couple of weeks have been kind of hard on us. At our June meeting, we invited Planned Parenthood. They gave a very good presentation on the Dobbs-Jackson draft decision. I don't think any of us doubted what was going to happen next, but here we are the next month, and it's happened. We have a Supreme Court that completely disregarded nearly 50 years of precedents and eliminated what has been a fundamental right for women and for all of us, really. They completely misrepresented their positions. Information in my these draconian reversals on 20th century progress. And it gets worse than that. It's not just 20th century progress. Justice Alito actually referred to a 13th century court case, literally, one could argue the Dark Ages. Only the tip of the iceberg, too. So Justice Thomas has come out and said that we should look at these past decisions and review what another one, and then the Obergefell decision, which gave us marriage equality in just the last several years. All what we would consider fundamental rights, they are now saying are not expressly written in the Constitution. Yet we know neither is one person, one vote. So it's hard to know where this Supreme Court is willing to stop. And it goes there. We know what happened on 4th, and at least 7 people were murdered, dozens others were wounded. Another tragic gun violent act. What was something very similar to an AR-15 purchased by a person who had new run-ins with the law. A week before that, another tragic shooting of an individual, 90 rounds fired, 60 hitting the person killed, and absolutely no excuse and no reason for that. Yes, Mark?
He was handcuffed when they delivered him to the morgue.
Correct. After firing the 90 rounds, they actually had the audacity to handcuff him. Yet the person in the Highland shooting was walked away and put in a car. You're absolutely right. And it doesn't stop there. So we also have the climate crisis. There was a UN climate report in April that said we're going to double the greenhouse gas emissions that were highlighted in the Paris Agreement, and we have city water and animal extinct. It is of horrific proportion. So we have it. Our institutions are failing us. Our society has been failing us. We live being inhabitable. Lot to be worried about. So what can we do? Well, as I was sitting sort of thinking about the 4th of July and really wanting to celebrate, and I did in some way, but had a lot of concern about all these things going on, and I just know that as a Democratic committee, we are empowered to make a difference and make a change in this world, particularly as Arlington Democrats. We are absolutely in one of the finest democratic in the country, one of the finest committees. What happened in this nation, and in what I hope will continue to be the greatest nation, and we need to fight and campaign for Democrats and help elect Democrats. We need to work with our Beyond Arlington group, who you're going to hear from a little bit later on tonight, to re-elect our delegation. So you can do that through phone banking or canvassing or texting or any other number of ways to get involved. But I encourage everyone to do so. Now is the time. And there are a lot of great opportunities out there with Beyond Arlington. And I know our campaign and Matt DeFranti is going to be starting up canvassing at least next month, if not sooner. So look for those opportunities, and I look forward to seeing everybody out there on the doors and on the phones. With that, is Daniel Davis is here. Great. Daniel, why don't you come up and give your presentation?
Of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is taking place this month. July 26th is technically the anniversary. And so what I'm going to just sort of do is walk you through a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act, the history of discrimination people with disabilities encountered, what the ADA does, and then sort of lead that into some of what we should be aware of about and things that we should be responsive to. So, signing back in 1990, and the quote, let the shameful wall, President George H.W. contributions from both sides of the aisle, including Senators Dole and Republican Representative Steve Bartlett. This really was one of the most recent to pass. So moving forward. Okay, so here's a little bit of background about the history of Americans with disabilities as second-class citizens. If you go back, there was large-scale institutionalization. If what were known as blue babies, babies with Down syndrome, were born, and this story is within my family because my mom's sister was actually home. They had a heart defect, which families not to even take kids with. We've heard a lot about the loss of reproductive rights, sterilized people with disabilities. Of both the Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote that 3 generations, and excuse the language, because it said 3 generations of idiots are enough. So, actually, Virginia. And the woman who was in her daughter was an honors student. So the facts of the case were actually wrong. And basically, society was inaccessible to returning of included in the 1964 Civil Rights Act or the first fair housing laws. We can move on from that. So here's just a few events. I'm going to probably skip through some of these. 1932 was obviously a milestone because FDR was the first president ever elected with a visible disability. He had polio, and even though he concealed it from the public, he used a wheelchair. In 1952 was really the beginning of the modern disability rights movement, Ed Roberts in California fought for admission to the University of California at Berkeley, starting the independent living movement. In '63, JFK passed the predecessor to the Developmental Disabilities Act. Some of you may know that the Kennedys actually had a child with developmental. The Kennedy family actually had Kennedy had a sibling, Rose, who had a developmental disability. In 1968, the Architectural Barriers Act was actually the first law to start promoting accessibility. And then in 1970, Judy Heumann, who is actually a DC resident, and I know some of you have been fortunate enough to hear her speak. She actually successfully sued the New York State Board of Education in order to get a teacher's license because they did not want to give her a teacher's license as a woman who used a wheelchair. So essentially, that then led to the predecessor to the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the Nixon administration had to be pressured to sign that, but did. 19 was passed, as well as actually, and this is actually something, if you've ever watched the movie Crip Camp, you'll have gotten some familiarity with this. Essentially, in 1977, the disability community actually took over health and welfare Francisco regional office. Essentially, the Carter administration was refused. And this is important to know because, yes, our own party at times has been an obstacle on disability and essentially allows separate but equal, but basically the disability communities and the regulations as drafted. Then in 1986, National Council on Disability recommended the development of of what became the Americans with Disabilities Act. Shortly after that, essentially crawled up the Capitol steps to push back on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and finally then in 1990 it passed. So now, what does the ADA do? Title I is about ability discrimination, including that you cannot make pre-employment inquiries except under limited circumstances. State and local governments, that's actually a really critical portion, and that's basically developed from the Rehabilitation Act. And basically, the key decision here, Supreme Court, basically was authored by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, finding that unjustified segregation of persons with disabilities constitutes a form of discrimination in violation of Title II of the ADA. Then the ADA was actually challenged in its constitutionality as applied to the states in a case called Tennessee v. Lane, where basically the state of Tennessee did not want to have to make its courtrooms accessible to court reporters or plaintiffs or defendants with disabilities, but that was upheld by 5-4 then, which also should send a message to all of us, given recent court decisions about how tenuous and fragile critical disability rights are. Title III of the ADA involves public accommodations, and that basically prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in place of the public accommodations, businesses, businesses asking for the right to get a sort of cooling period or waiting period before people with disabilities get to enforce their rights, because there have been some vexatious litigants who have brought, I think most people would agree, overly aggressive cases. However, putting a waiting period on people's civil rights is kind of a red line for disability advocates. And then just to touch on it, there's also Title IV was telecommunications, and Title V was miscellaneous provisions, including the definition of disability. And there, the Supreme Court over time has done some mischief in that area. There were a series of bad decisions, and the action of the original intent in terms of definition of disability, because the Supreme Court had basically strayed. Next slide. Okay, so this brings us to what I think are sort of the hot button issues for us, essentially opportunities and challenges here in Virginia. First thing is voting rights. Inaccessibility remains a significant issue